All right. All right, if everyone's ready, we can get started again for the day. Beautiful day. It's nice to have some warmth and sunshine. Did anybody see the eclipse? Anyone as crazy as I was at 2:30 in the morning? I was out in my driveway in the bed of my pickup truck staring at the moon. Get darker and darker at 2:30 in the morning. So that's dedication, I suppose. Anyway, it was beautiful. So anyway, good afternoon officially. Let me welcome you all to week 4 of our Great Decisions Global Topics Speaker and Discussion Series. We're excited to keep going. We're at the halfway point after today already. Hard to believe. For those of you, I see some new faces. My name is Aaron Nicely. I am the chair of our committee, and so thanks to the committee, as always, for all the great work we're putting in to keep these events going. So thank you all over there to Julia, the coffee bar. I guess that makes you a barista, right? I like that. So, as I always say, we cannot do this without all of you. So thank you all for coming out today. I know life is busy on Friday afternoons. It's great to see you all here. We really operate our Great Decisions program, and we have now for nearly 4 decades, on a simple premise. We're trying to create a space for a thoughtful, nonpartisan, and intellectually engaged communication and discussion for the residents of Delaware and the county that surrounds us, dealing with the issues that confront our community, our town, our state, our country, and really the world. We're trying to bring the world to William Street, and I think we're doing a good job of it. As we continue the 2025 season, we have a really great season. As I said, we're at the halfway point, week 4. A couple quick updates. If you want to sign up for our mailing list, if you haven't already, emailing list, we do have a new YouTube channel where we put recordings of our live events. Or in the cases where our speaker requests not to be recorded, we have an equivalent video that you can watch. So if you or any friends or family members want to revisit or watch what we talk about, or you can't make it on any given week, that email comes out usually on Mondays following the event. So this coming Monday will be the one for today. So let us know, and I can make sure we get you on our emailing list. It's just Great Decisions of Delaware OH. It's our YouTube channel. And so we would love to have you visit that. We're getting a really great engagement with that site here the last few weeks. It's been like 50, 60 people every week are watching our videos, which is that's nice. That's very nice. Today we have another great session. I think we're having a really good year. And I'll be introducing that in a moment. I did want to remind you, though, for the final 4 weeks after today, of what topics are coming up. And we have a handout over here if you'd like to have our schedule. You can stick it on your refrigerator. We have coming up next week, the future of American policy in the Middle East, looking at the future after the on-again, off-again war in Gaza. We have a topic on artificial intelligence and its implications for national security, the future of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, and European security, with a return speaker from last year, a general in the Air Force, or lieutenant, I think a general. And we're going to wrap up then an insightful discussion on India and its evolving role as a major player in the world. So a lot of great talks coming up. We do still have the booklets for sale. We have about 9 booklets. There we go, and about 9 booklets left. They're at cost. We don't get any profit from these, but we're there if you'd like to have the essays that go along with our talks. They're $35. You can buy them. You can get electronic versions online for digital copies if you want a phone or a tablet, things like that. They are really, really leading scholars across the country that the Foreign Policy Association gets to write these. So they are very thoughtful, very informative, and I encourage you to do that. Really helpful things to read. And finally, special thanks, as always, to our sponsors and our supporters, the Delaware County District Library, the League of Women Voters, Main Street, Delaware, William Street, United Methodist Church, our home here, the Willowbrook Christian Communities, both locations. They've been very thoughtful in supporting us over the years, and countless other businesses and organizations that have really contributed to keep this as a space for discussion. Makes Delaware what it is. So again, if you're all out there, thank you for that. So to our main event, I don't want to take up all of Goran's time here. Today's topic is the evolution of U.S. leadership in the global economy, dilemmas and choices. Back in 1936, a British parliamentarian, Sir Austen Chamberlain, not the one that was the prime minister, was a relative of his, he gave us the phrase, "May you live in interesting times." Well, in terms of U.S. leadership in the global economy, those times are definitely upon us. For the past 80 years, U.S. economic strength, both at home and abroad, has been built on two competing dominant models, a Keynesian model and the neoliberal economic model that became popular in the 1980s with Reagan and Thatcher. More recently, though, we saw this with the record-strong U.S. economy during the Biden administration, or the latter years of it, certainly. Though, as our Great Discussions essay today notes, even the Biden administration was moving away from these dominant economic models toward what they call a post-neoliberal economic model in many ways. It's an interesting thing to discuss. And now we face a great decision. The new U.S. presidential administration and their purported policies have cast a fresh spotlight on the U.S. economy at a time of great political transition in our country and, by extension, the world. The future is hard to predict, obviously, but the early signs are that the Trump administration is attempting to adopt a model of U.S. leadership in the global economy that is centered more on this post-neoliberal economic nationalism, often compared more to U.S. policies in the late 1800s or in the 1930s, in an apparent redirection away from these dominant models that really framed the 20th and early 21st century for the U.S. and our role in the world economy. So, as I said, interesting times. And so to lead our discussion today, I'm really glad, where'd you go? There you are behind me, sorry, to welcome back Dr. Goran Skosplis. Goran is the holder of the Robert L. and Mary C. Milligan Associate Professorship in the Department of Economics and Business at Ohio Wesleyan University here in our own town. His research and teaching focus on macroeconomic theory, international development economics, and institutional economic change, with a specialty in the post-communist countries of East Central Europe and the former Soviet Union. He won the 2024 Ohio Wesleyan Award that's known as the Bishop Herbert Welch Meritorious Teaching Award. That's a big deal, so nice job on that. And he's a frequent contributor here at Great Decisions over the years as well. Sorry about that. Goran, I was thinking, you and I have known each other for nearly 16 years, and I think in all that time we've never sat down and just talked about economics. So I'm really glad to have you here today. Yeah, it obviously was. That's why I'm trying to rectify that, So I'm really glad to have you here today. So with that, let me just hand it over to you. And everyone, please help me in welcoming Goran Skosplis to the podium.
Let's do a switcheroo here.
Yeah, there you go. And then don't forget to turn your mic on. I'll move
I
this
did.
one out of the way.
It's kind of smallish, no? All right.
Is that going to be okay?
Yeah, it's small, so everybody can see.
On wheels,
Sure.
Too.
There you go.
There we go.
The old-fashioned optics, huh?
That's right.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Aaron. And I guess we should be sitting down and having some econ discussion soon. Good afternoon. So let's see, it's 12:10 or 11:10 when I didn't change my watch. I'm on spring break, so I'm not paying too much attention to times yet. Next week again. So today, I guess I'm going to be talking a little bit about U.S. leadership in the global economy. Although I would say it's a little bit more interesting to talk about what's going on with our economy. I've seen that other speakers have talked about U.S. foreign policy, more from the political side. There hasn't been much discussion about what's going on in the economy. If you're hearing stock markets falling, tariffs are one day on, one day off, businesses are uncertain what's going to happen. So I'm going to try to tie that in instead of just talking about the foreign economic leadership. To give you a little bit of a background, talking about tariffs. Tariffs are now on display all the time. Tariffs used to be an important part of the U.S. economy a long time ago. And we used to get a lot of income from tariffs. Tariffs used to be the main source of our government's revenue. But the government at that time didn't spend much. There was no Medicare, there was no Social Security, there was no Medicaid. Government was very bare bones, so to say. As societies progressed, we expected the government to cover many more functions in our daily lives. Well, that needed to be covered with something, and that's when the government moved away from relying on tariffs as a tool, but instituted an income tax. I believe in 1913, we started with income tax. Before there was no income tax. So if you look, period prior to World War II, was relatively high tariffs, especially if you look, even if you go back into the 1800s, tariffs were really high. Then tariffs started coming down, and then we had, after the Great Depression, or during the Great Depression, after the collapse of 1929, we started tariffs, and we started really high tariffs. It was called the Smoot-Hawley Tax Act that was passed by the Senate, which instituted huge tariffs towards our trading partners. To give you an idea, this is what we would call, for instance, economic nationalism, where you're not opening up to others, but trying to close off, trying to prevent flow of goods and services cross-border. So we see, this is a really neat graph. If you look here, it starts in 1929, and then it goes, as the months go, the further away you are, more trade there is. Closer in, less trade there is. So what you start seeing is, as time goes by, this is still 1929, 1930, you know? So 29, 30, 31, and by 33, you know, the trade just kept decreasing and decreasing and decreasing over time. Doesn't happen like this when you stop the switch. Like we had COVID. One day we had the economy going, the other day, dark, lights out. Usually those things don't happen like that in the economy. You put a trade, and then it slowly starts shrinking. And it takes a while. It took a few years for that to happen. That's the first thing. The second point is, once tariffs were really high up here, look how long it took for them to really come down. One would argue it took almost until the 1980s for tariffs to really come down. Because once you put a tariff in, others put the tariff in, and it's very hard to negotiate to lower those down. You know, when they say it's very hard to build reputation, but very easy to lose it. So you have free trade, you can easily lose that, but getting it back might be very hard. So playing with that is, I would say, a little bit troubling from my perspective. So economic nationalism in the 1930s, but then we believe that, you know, maybe that was one of the reasons why we might have had World War II. So post-World War II, with the US leadership, through the Marshall Plan and other initiatives, and creation of institutions such as the World Bank and the IMF, both of which are centered in the United States. I mean, they're headquartered in the United States. We have OECD, which is Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, creation of something called GATT, which is a General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, to try to promote trade between countries. The idea was, if countries cooperate and trade, they're not going to have wars. This was especially true. We tried to get France and Germany to try to cooperate, so to say, not to have war. If you establish strong relationships between your trading partners, there is less likelihood that you're going to go into the war with them. That was the general idea. Here, on our continent, we created something called NAFTA in 1994. That was during the Clinton years, I believe. Yes. And the EU was created. Well, first of all, we had, what is this? ECSC, European Coal and Steel Community. So this was the predecessor to the EU. Then it later on evolved into the EU. All of these I'm putting here, these were attempts to create strong economic ties between countries to reduce the probability of fighting. Because Europe had two world wars started in Europe, and we're like, we're going to do whatever it takes not to do that. The US was instrumental in all of this, starting these. I mean, Bretton Woods Agreement in post-World War II, that was in the United States. So in the 80s, like Aaron pointed out, we had a little bit of a switch, a little bit of a pullback in our economy, not necessarily in terms of our leadership. The idea that markets are better than the government. Markets can do things better. In the United States, we had Ronald Reagan. In Great Britain, we had Margaret Thatcher. And these were what was called the neoliberal policies that your article talks about. in economic circles, some of the policies that were prescribed by this ideology was called the Washington Consensus, and 10 general prescriptions: lower taxes, less government regulation, privatization, anything to get the government out of doing business and get businesses into doing business. That was the idea. So that was, we not only practiced in the United States, we also try to promote that around the world, especially in Eastern Europe. When you think about the Berlin Wall fell, all of these countries were under socialism, and all of a sudden, okay, what are we going to do now? Well, capitalism clearly won at that point, and they needed policies to restructure, to modernize, to really start up their economy from what it was before, and these were policies that were suggested to them. This is how you actually make your economies grow and be successful in the long run. China was opening up. China started opening up a little earlier, but we were also trying to promote some of these policies to China: privatization, deregulation, and so on, less government involvement. So that was, in general, principles of Washington Consensus. Lower tariffs, more trade, more movement of capital. So that was the idea. And that was really around until probably 2016. Even during the Obama years, lots of these policies were being promoted. But after the 2016 election, the idea was that this is misguided, that trade will lead to peace and cooperation. Trying to believe that our economic rivals are going to become benign if we try to cooperate with them. I mean, primary criticism was China, trying to say, well, China is really not playing by the rules, so we need to start doing something to try to get China to behave and not take advantage of us. So we started off at home, where NAFTA was renegotiated, and out of that we created the USMCA, US, Mexico, and Canada agreement. You know, I would say NAFTA was an agreement. All three countries benefited from it. Not everybody in those countries benefited from it. There were clear winners, and there were clear losers. But overall, the pie was bigger because of this program. Did it need updating by that point? Yes. I'd say some of the things on intellectual property rights needed fixing, which were not important in 1994 when it was signed. By 2020, there's some topics, some new goods were being in place that needed to be introduced into the agreement. But you couldn't just have something called NAFTA 2, because that would mean that the previous administration did something well, so you need to say that this is the worst agreement and we are going to create a new agreement. But changes were not tremendously different. Plus, by that time, even the Obama administration was already working on updating NAFTA. All right, so we did that. We pulled out of something called a Trans-Pacific Partnership. This was about, the Obama administration was trying to create this, which is the U.S., Canada on our side, and then Mexico, Chile, countries that are bordering more the Pacific, and on the east side, Japan, Taiwan, and a few other countries. Not China, though. China wasn't part of crafting this. The idea was that you create an agreement that China will eventually want to get in, but China is not part of it, so if they want to get in, they'll just have to abide by the rules of whatever the agreement was going to be in the time. The agreement was actually pretty good, and it was going to force China, if it was going to become a member of it at some point in the future, to reform some of the internal things. But then, of course, during the campaign, that became like one of those, don't touch that. So Trump was vilifying it, and then finally even Hillary Clinton saw that, well, this is not working, so she vilified it, and then finally U.S. pulled out. Other countries actually moved along, and they started something. It's not called a Trans-Pacific Partnership, but they said, okay, U.S. is not the leader in this. We're going to start it ourselves then. China has applied as a member to that new group, but it hasn't been accepted yet. So we also had the Paris Agreement, which is an environmental agreement between countries to reduce carbon emissions, and last week's speaker's Laurie Anderson, she spoke a little bit about that. But I mean, I'm putting that not as an economic thing, but more of show that we are actually pulling back away from being active participants and leading the way to more, we are important, the rest of the world doesn't matter. So we did create higher tariffs, put higher tariffs in trade war with China during during this time, which are still around. The Biden administration really didn't remove these. I'll speak a little bit later about why I think that's the case. WTO is the World Trade Organization, which tries to police any trade violations. We diminish the power of it by not allowing certain bodies to get new members to be on there. So the power of it is really not as important as it was. And we started with something which is called the industrial policy, which is government spending on certain things to promote, especially industry and the semiconductors. We see that we are having that in New Albany with Intel deciding to open up a plant, although now all the things that are going on with Intel, so paused, new CEO was announced yesterday, I believe, so who knows what's going to happen. They did receive a lot of help through this act from the government, both local government through tax breaks and the federal government, so we'll see whether they're going to actually do this. So CHIPS stands for help for the semiconductor industry. We believe that this is important, that we can't have this produced elsewhere, so we're going to do it at home. Does anybody know who the biggest producer of chips is, or where it happens? Taiwan. In Taiwan, right? TSMC. And yeah, there are reasonable worries about what might happen to Taiwan as a nation. And if that's the case, are we going to have access to the most advanced chips? All right. How important is trade for us? It is important. It is large, but we are a large economy. In terms of the share of our economy, trade is not that big as compared to other countries. When you combine imports and exports, right now we are at about 27%, 28%, 15 and 18. So it's not huge right there. This is the United States. So imports and exports, what does this tell you? We export less than we import, so we have a trade deficit. But share of all of this is much less than it comes to Mexico or Canada or even China. So we don't deal with other countries as much as other countries deal with others. Why? Because we're large. We have a large economy, large market, unlike, let's say, Germany, they have lots of neighbors, Holland, Belgium, Austria, and they trade a lot between them. It would be the same thing if we considered our trade with Indiana as international trade, right? We don't, but for Germany, that is considered international trade. So this is to give you an idea about how important trade is. It is, but it's not a big chunk of our economy. People say, well, we don't produce anything. We don't export. We just import. No. We both import and export. So if you look at here, we have imports and we have exports. They kind of move together. As the country gets bigger over time, we both import more and export more. Do we have a trade deficit? Yeah. It seems that we started having trade deficit right there in the late 70s, especially starting from the early 80s. That's when we started having persistent trade deficits instead of more balanced trade. Now, one of the questions is, why would that be the case? Well, what happened in the early 80s? Ronald Reagan. Okay, and what did he do? Cut back government, right? You have, but what does that really mean? Cut back government. It sounds good on paper, but he did cut back taxes, so lower taxes, also increased spending, especially on the military, which both resulted in a big deficit. So that's when we started having persistent fiscal deficits. Economic theory is pretty clear about the relationship between national saving, which government is a big contributor to, and trade deficits. They go hand in hand. Sometimes they're called the twin deficits. So if you have a deficit on the fiscal house, you're going to end up having a deficit on the trade balance. So do they move together? Yeah. When you look at this graph, we have federal surplus or deficit in blue. If it's below this line, that means it's a deficit. And most of it is, where did we start having deficits? Persistent deficits right there when we started big tax cut and not really corresponding decrease in national spending or government spending. And then we have net exports being, again, below this tells you a deficit. Obviously, they don't move one for one, but general trend between the two of those is clear. So if the goal is really to take care of your trade deficit, one way you can try is to put a tariff on it, but that doesn't really work. It is to fix the fiscal house. It's really getting fiscal budget in order, either increasing taxes or lowering government expenditure or both of these. If you believe that trade is a huge problem or trade deficit is a huge problem. I honestly don't believe that trade deficit is a big problem. In the very, very long run, perhaps, or if we were a country like, Canada, that would be a problem. Not so much for us. And one of the main reasons is that we have the dollar as the world reserve currency, which allows us to do things that other countries really just don't have. It's like we can have a printing press and just print money that other countries are willing to take and put in the vault and put on the side that does nothing but allows us to actually keep doing that. As long as we have the currency as a reserve currency, this is really not a big issue. So we talk about we have trade deficit, trade deficit. Yes, we have a trade deficit in goods. This is services. What does this tell you? It tells you a little bit different story. Where are we? We're actually the surplus. We export more services than we import. Hollywood movies, Taylor Swift doing a concert and people buying that. Google, people using Google around the world. People using Apple around the world, Apple services and so on, Apple Music. Those are all things that we export, and those are huge. So we do export more. Financial services, insurance services, we are actually in a plus there. Now, why do I bring up services? Because that's where most of our people are. We are a service economy. If you look at this share of the economy, just over 70% work in general services. That's a lot. I mean, if you consider some of the government stuff, if you want to consider it services because people do services, that can increase. I try to separate out government, especially given that government is really in the news right now. Manufacturing, not that big. Now, does it mean that we don't produce anything anymore? Absolutely not. If you look at our industrial output, manufacturing output, we are producing more now than we have ever produced in history in terms of manufacturing output. So whatever industrial goods that we are producing, we produce more of them. Not so much TVs that you might see as consumers, that comes from China. Let me tell you a story. I bought a TV. I have a TV in my office. Oh, that's nice. I have Bloomberg on when I sit in the office. It was $99 delivered. It's like 32-inch, not a huge, not a 70-inch. 32-inch, but somebody made it. I couldn't make it. I don't think anybody in this room could put it together. Then it was delivered. It was delivered to my home, not only shipped across the ocean, delivered to my home. Somebody still made money, and it was for $99. Like, how do you compete with that, right? But industrial goods, that's where we have the knowledge. When it comes to, let's say, the planes. Boeing, we make planes. Right? That's a good, that's not a service. We are not really that keen on buying necessarily Chinese airplanes. They're still not there when it comes to performance and safety. Although, instead of them rising, Boeing might come down to their level in terms of safety the way things are going, so who knows. But those are things that we don't buy as households. So we, people in a household, have this appearance that everything comes from China, we don't produce anything anymore. That's not true. We produce a lot more things than we ever had. So production, manufacturing output has grown. But what has happened at the same time, we don't use people to produce those things. We use machines, robots, and so on. So in terms of people employed in manufacturing, that has continuously gone down. Output has continuously gone up. So we don't have men and women working on the assembly line pulling levers. Robots do that. People that work in these manufacturing plants are highly trained engineers who program robots, or if they break down, you repair them. Not somebody without a high school degree that doesn't have anything that used to pull the lever. Those jobs are not coming back. Unfortunately, I'm not saying fortunate or not, but saying that we need to help because put a tariff to help certain industries. These industries really don't use that many workers anymore. All right, so that's, remember, most of it comes from services, and in services we actually do have a surplus in our economy. Like I told you, we import more than we export, yes? We have a trade deficit. So somebody is giving us stuff. We are giving them back something, but we are taking more than we are giving them back. I would say that's pretty nice. We're living beyond our means. Okay, and others are allowing us to do that? I would say, okay. So where does this come from? So we have a trade deficit, right? That's sometimes called a current account in the language of international economics. But that needs to be matched up with the funds. Where do funds come from? That's called the capital account. Others are willing to lend us money or funds. Why would they want to do that? Well, they want to keep the dollar. How do they want to keep it? They just want to keep it in the vault somewhere if something happens. Just like people keep gold bars stashed. They're useless. They're sitting there not being in use. So is it good for producers of gold that people actually want to do that? Yes, absolutely. Is it good for producers of diamonds that people actually buy diamonds and use them as rings or so? I got to tell you a story. I told my wife, I kind of sold her the story that I don't believe in diamonds. This is, so we didn't go for the diamond ring. Like I said, they have a racket over there in terms of how valuable these things are. We'll spend the money somewhere else instead of using on a diamond that's almost useless. I mean, use in industrial use, fine. But where I'm going with this is, if you have something that other people want, you can actually benefit from that. And that's the power of the purse that we have. People still want the dollar around the world as a reserve currency. That allows us to have this surplus to live beyond our means. If others sour on the United States and say, you know what, we don't want the US dollar anymore. Why? Well, we don't know what the future is. Maybe US is not going to honor its debts. There are some stories that we might not honor our debts. Well, then others might not allow us to do that. So then we have to start saving ourselves, or governments have to start spending less, remember, to bring that deficit down. And that's not really a pretty picture long run. Who is the biggest recipient of cash from around the world? The United States. Others like us. Others like the stability of the United States, the laws that we have created, the support system. Right now, the government is being vilified. I think that, I grew up in a socialist regime, socialist country, where laws are arbitrary. That if you know someone, that's how you might get a job. Just because your uncle knows somebody over there, you have a connection, or you get a contract, your business gets a contract because your wife's uncle has connection with the local official. That's not how we deal primarily. It is usually rule of law that applies, and that helps businesses. In the long run, the economy thrives much more if you have clear rule-based order. That's why others come here, because they know how things work and how to plan for their business. Dismantling some of this supporting system, and government really does enforce that. I mean, who's going to enforce the laws? It's the courts. Well, courts are not private. Courts are the government. Who enforces, intellectual property laws? Again, it's the courts that enforce all of that. So it's our legal system, the rule of law. Dismantling that might not work well in the very, very long run. All right. Do we have a lot of uncertainty in the economy?
Is that where we're heading, that Stone Age? Is that where we're heading, that Stone Age thing?
Yeah, maybe that's just one of those. Well, yeah, it's true. No, we'll be fine. Look, no matter what happens, it's not like we are going to die. It's not like the economy is going to collapse. It's going to take time, and the economy can't transform. I mean, even during COVID, it didn't the economy didn't completely collapse. We shut it off, we restarted it. We had issues, especially on the supply side of things. It took a while for these issues to be sorted out, and while the issues were being sorted out, we had inflation. So things do show up. I usually think about the economy as a balloon full of water. And you're trying to squeeze one part because maybe you don't like it. Like you want to increase tariffs. I don't know yet why, but you try to increase tariffs, and then what happens? Just pops somewhere else. So inflation happened because we had probably too much spending. I think our economy recovered too fast from COVID. That's my honest opinion. So when COVID happened, we freaked out. Washington freaked out, and they said, just spend. How much? As much as it takes. And we had both President Trump and President Biden had two really large fiscal packages to help the public. And then the economy just recovered quickly. But they had passed already this spending, so they couldn't pull it back, could they? That was just un-American. You can't just take it away now that you've already set it aside to be spent. So what happened is we had huge increased boost in demand. People with lots of income. Remember, the idea behind this was very noble. The economy was going to collapse totally, so we had to spend it. But the economy didn't collapse, so let's still spend it. Okay, so you squeezed the balloon on one side and it popped somewhere else. There was not enough goods and services produced. Why? Because businesses can't adjust their production overnight. I mean, remember in COVID they were talking about how there's shortage of couches and shortage of electronics, especially couches. Right? So how does a business plan? Well, they say, okay, on average we sell 100 couches a month, and we see this pattern, maybe more in winter months when people spend inside, less in summer months. So on a typical year, that's how many couches I'm going to order as a company. Okay. Well, all of a sudden now, people want 300 couches because everybody wants a couch. I don't have those. I need to order them. They need to be ordered, produced. That takes about 3 or 4 months. It needs to arrive in a big ship. It's not like you can just make up a couch. So, but during that time, couches are really pricey, and there's a shortage of couches. But will that business adjust? Yeah, they will adjust. Just take some time. It doesn't happen overnight. All right. So all of this uncertainty really creates a lot of problems for business planning, especially the inconsistencies. I would argue if you want to do a tariff, which I don't agree with, slap a tariff and then stick with it. Say this is going to be tariff and that's it. Instead of one day high, the other day low. No, we're pulling it back. Nope, tariffs back on, off, on. So businesses are like, okay, I don't know what's going to happen. The thing about tariffs is if you ship steel from Canada into the United States, depending on what's the rule that day, that moment when it crosses the border, that's the tariff you pay. So if you're a business, if you're a steel maker in Canada and you're shipping it to, let's say, Detroit, because Detroit uses a lot of steel from Canada to make cars. Okay, so do I do it on a Wednesday? It's 25%. Well, maybe on Thursday he's going to reduce it down to 10%, so I'll just wait until Thursday, and hopefully it's not 50. So businesses have really been in a complete disarray in terms of planning, long-term planning. What do we do? How do we create contingencies, but you don't know what's going to happen? So there has been already a pullback in terms of investment. On the consumer side, consumers are the bulk of the economy. About 2/3 of the economy is consumers. And how consumers goes, that's how typically the economy goes. Stock market, you would say, well, stock market is not the economy. I agree. I completely agree. But it matters. People look at their account. So how many of you have actually gone and looked at your retirement account in the last week? Maybe you haven't done it in the past few months, but last week you're like, yeah, let me take a look what's going on there. And then you're seeing like, ooh, maybe you're going to cut back on a little bit of spending, which is absolutely normal. This is what we call the wealth effect. It doesn't really affect your income because you're not drawing or from it, but you feel poor, and you're like, yeah, maybe I'm not going to do that. Buy a new car that I was planning on buying. Maybe I'll hold off. Doesn't mean everyone, but some people on the margin do that, and then we have a pullback in terms of consumption. So consumer confidence numbers came out actually just this morning. University of Michigan consumer sentiment, it is lower because one of the things is the stock market. I mean, we have 10% pullback and all the other things that are going on in terms of politics. I call the president the Mirage Man in terms of things need to appear, but they need to be. They don't need to be. So needs to say, okay, tariffs are there, but then not for everything. As long as you can say there's tariffs, but not as big as perhaps I would expect or somebody else would expect. Maybe he's going to do same in migration. I'm hearing the numbers not right now. Actually, there's less deportations right now than they were during the Biden years. There were some, they were very public, but overall, you dismantle one system that's very efficient to create a different one with people that are not very good at doing that, and of course you're going to have efficiency which is not very good. It's kind of ironic that the government is trying to promote government efficiency, then dismantles an efficient way of deporting people to an inefficient way. You can't make this up. Is it the ability to just claim victories without really doing lots of these things? I hope that that's the case because lots of the proposals are very destructive. Trying to dismantle the entire economy and recreate everything. I don't know why. What was so bad about the economy in the first place? If you're saying people were hurt by globalization, I agree. Ending globalization is not the way to do it because globalization did more good than harm. How would you do it? Well, businesses that have been very successful, like when you think about all of the businesses that benefited from trade. Apple is this clandestine company that benefited tremendously from globalization, enormously. But not Apple as a company, shareholders of Apple. They've benefited tremendously. Who has lost? People in manufacturing. We have been very unwilling politically to actually transfer benefit from one side to the losses, to cover losses from the other side. And that's why we're getting so much discontent about globalization. We're not getting discontent from Apple and Google. They're liking it. It's from people that have lost their jobs in Ohio, in West Virginia, in Kentucky, in Michigan, all the plants. And we, as a society, we have been unwilling to actually make people whole. Either you relocate them, help them with that, help them with education, encourage businesses to come to those areas and so on to generate jobs, which would be helpful for these people. Tariffs are not going to really cut it. It's not the point is not to kill globalization. The point is to try to fix problems that globalization causes, which clearly there are. I'm not saying that trade is this awesome thing that benefits everyone. No, there are costs. All right. What's 35? Is that about good? Okay. One more thing, or maybe I'll leave that for the answer, question and answer.
All right. Is my mic on you? Thank you very much, Goran. That was very, very insightful. So we do have plenty of time for Q&A. I'm actually going to kick it off with a question of mine.
All right.
That I suspect
I could talk about this for another 24 hours if you really want me to. If you have time.
We could. Well, I think a question a lot of us probably have is, I think you did a really excellent job here of describing the idea that the national economy versus a global economy, that's a sort of a false distinction somewhat, that they are blurred. I would love to hear your insights on this, is given what we've seen so far in the last 2 months of the Trump administration, do you feel like that there is a global economic strategy behind what we're doing, or is this being generous?
It's mostly domestic stuff. I think, when people get upset, you watch Putin on the news, and you get upset. This guy's lying. He's like making stuff up. We're not his audience. He doesn't care what we think. I feel Trump has his own supporters, and that's his audience. He doesn't care what others think. And he promised them these certain things, that America is great, and the view is that if we're going to be great, others need to be not so great. So trade is lots of times seen as, at best, a zero-sum game. So if one party is to win, the other one has to lose. That's not how trade works. That's an old that's an archaic way of thinking about trade. Mercantilists used to do that back in the 19th century. Trade typically benefits both. That's why we do it. Countries are not really forced into trade. they willingly trade with one another. So I feel like lots of these things are not really looking at the international engagement. It's mostly domestic.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. All right. Okay. Who else would like to ask some questions here?
How much would you say personal ego is responsible for many of the trade decisions that have been made in the last 2 months?
As an economist, I don't see much of a rationale behind those. So it has to be something else because economics can't really explain it. Now, one of the theories which you could ask, okay, what is the main goal? The main goal is to lower taxes. That has been on the agenda, to decrease taxes or to even make the tax cut that was passed during his last administration permanent because they were going to expire in 2025. Now, there are some fiscal hawks, deficit hawks in the Republican Party who are not really willing to do anything unless there is either a reduction in government spending or revenue is raised somewhere else. They would prefer, obviously, reduction in services, but increasing revenue somewhere else without increasing any taxes would be good. This could be one of the venues that the reason for this is to raise revenue, or at least give the appearance of raising revenue because tariff is not very big. We have about $2 trillion deficit in terms of trade. Or I'm sorry, fiscal deficit about $2 trillion. To cover that, you would need to slap 100% tariff, and you would expect that others are going to send the same amount of stuff, that demand wouldn't collapse, and that there would be no retaliation. If you assume all of these things, maybe you can cover $2 trillion with such high tariffs. I mean, this is a fairy tale because it's never going to happen. If you can show that you're raising some funds, most people really don't understand how the mechanics of all of this work. So you just need to sell. We have an increase in revenue. You don't need to be as specific as how much. Just like we have an increase. Now we have the revenue to cover for the tax cuts. That could be a story. I mean, I don't know. Might play out. Maybe not. That could be one of the reasons why you do tariff. It's not called a tax, right? It's called a tariff. But what is it? It's a tax on consumption, right? But it's not called a tax. Again, you can sell it as we're charging foreigners. Foreigners are not paying for it. But you can still say it. You can blame it on the foreigners. You vilify somebody else who is not American. That could be a reason why. Again, who knows? But that could be one of the reasons. Personal stuff, maybe there's some vendettas, but maybe. Do you have anything in mind?
It just appears to me that ego has taken over logic.
Now,
And somehow he's managed to convince the country that a tariff is not a tax. I was taught in school that a tariff is a tax.
it is. Tax on consumption. It's actually a regressive tax compared to an income tax, which is progressive tax. One thing, if you look at that Zelensky episode that happened a few weeks ago, which was, you don't treat your kid that way. You don't treat a 10-year-old that way. You didn't say thank you. And nothing came out of it. That was a show. What happened in Saudi Arabia last week was when Rubio was there, actually they came to an agreement without any fuss right away. When you have diplomats actually doing diplomatic stuff instead of having to show wins. So it was great that Trump wasn't there. So if you translate, that was obviously a political thing. If you translate that into anything that is said on TV, it might start making sense. That it is more of a show and as a message to a very small group of hardcore supporters, because he doesn't need the rest of the people. He just needs support of a small group to do the things that he is doing. Tariffs are the only thing that executive can do. They can't do the interest rates, that's the Fed. They can't change taxes, that's Congress. So the only thing that you can actually do through the executive is tariffs. So that's the tool, that's pretty much the only tool that he has right now in his toolbox, so he's using it all the time. Yeah, he does. But I mean, he can't tell Supreme Court to do something, right? At least, I mean, he also has Congress, but then they have to actually come up with a policy. In this case, this way, he's doing it. And how many times has he changed the view on tariffs recently? Right? When you think about Jerome Powell, who is chairman of the Fed, how careful is he when he does press releases and interviews? Very careful. There's strong, the committee meets and they discuss, committee of very high experts to decide what's going to happen. Now, do they get it always right? No, of course not. But it's after careful consideration. Taxes, too. When Congress actually passes some things, they do have subcommittees that work things out in terms of what is going to be the cost of something, long-term cost. Like 10-year, usually they look at what is a 10-year cost or 10-year benefit of a certain policy. They do cost-benefit analysis. This way you feel like, well, somebody woke up in the morning and decided, okay, 10% tariffs on this, 20% tariff on that, without much explanation. What is the long-term cost? What is the goal? What is the impact? And that's this. I don't think tariffs are really that he's interested that much in tariffs, because tariffs really don't do much. But people don't understand him, allow him to do other things which really he wants to do. That could be a story that can make sense.
We're going to Canada. Should we pack some bourbon to take us with us?
If you want to drink it, I think others might say, like, I don't want to drink it even if it's free.
Could you repeat the question? Could you repeat the question?
Oh, the question? Here.
Could you repeat the question?
Oh, the question was that they're going to Canada and whether they should take any bourbon with them. There's a
How do we go about retraining the people who have lost their jobs? Is there a sector of the economy that needs workers that we could easily help these people?
Yes, healthcare sector. We have lots of people your age, and they need lots of medical attention, medical service. It's not working machines, but working in nursing homes, actually going out and doing in-home care. And it's not only being nursed, but you need other technicians, part of that. Equipment, people who install equipment at different places. It is going to be mostly into services. As you saw, very few of our people work in manufacturing, only about 10%, and those are highly qualified. When they say, well, Intel is going to generate lots of jobs, yeah, those are engineering jobs. Those are not going to people pull levers. It's going to be somebody sitting behind a computer and telling the computer what to do. Unfortunately, those are gone. Or not complete, there's still some, don't get me wrong, but not as abundant as they were. Services. I mean, some of the good jobs you can still have without much education. We do lots of shipping. Okay, you need people who work in shipping, especially crane operators, at big places. Truck driving. Does it have some costs? Yeah. So especially if you're going to be without much education, that you can't be much of a chooser anymore.
The people in my family.
Here, hold on the microphone.
People in my family who are experiencing job insecurity are highly educated, not untrained workers. So what's the recipe for that?
They're not going to be unemployed for a long time. Even if they lose a job, most people are unemployed for very short periods of time. Yes, there are some people who are unemployed for a long period of time, but that's an exception.
Some of the training is very specific and not transferable. So,
Like what? Give me an example. I mean, if they're typewriter repair people, I would say, yeah, probably then they're not going to have much.
okay.
I mean, I'm being a little.
He's not unemployed. He's not in danger of being unemployed. But my son literally was scrambling last night trying to figure out when he should be flying or when he should not be flying, because his company is a government contractor, defense industry, and whether or not a major conference that he's supposed to be at this week at Wright Pat will be on or off depends on the vote today.
Of course. So that's, I would say, those are going to be sorted out pretty soon. And if that, given his role in that, yes, obviously right now there's uncertainty, but it's uncertainty because some of the policies that have been put into place, not because of the structure of the overall economy. Professor Gitter here, his daughter works for one of the contractors too. So, that area is very uncertain right now. So nobody really knows what's going to happen. Now, will we dismantle the entire government? I don't think so. We still need government services. Some people might be cut, but there are going to be jobs in other industries. Obviously, that's very stressful because we don't have much of a support system. So job security or insecurity is very important. When you think about a country like Sweden, when you say, oh, Sweden, actually they have people moving between jobs a lot. People get fired, people get hired all the time, and there is a pretty good welfare structure. If you get laid off, you can get a pretty good support while you're looking for a new job. The support system is there. We unfortunately don't have as large of a support system, so it creates some anxiety, especially at this time because we're getting a lot of people unemployed. We might hit a recession. Nobody knows whether that's going to happen or not. Then you're going to have more people being unemployed, but that's going to be a cycle. Once we're out of that cycle, people are going to get employed again. We have a very dynamic economy, and your son, who knows what they're going to do in a few years? They might do a job that we don't even know doesn't exist yet. I teach at a liberal arts school. Lots of people say, what are you going to do with that as a liberal arts major? You're going to be able to learn quickly for a job that doesn't exist yet. I can't train you. If you look at 20 years ago, did you envision that everybody was going to use cell phones as much as they did nowadays? No. AI, ChatGPT, nobody knew that existed, that is a possibility that that's going to exist in the future. So I really don't know specifically what's going to happen, but we have, as society, been pretty good at figuring things out in the long run. When machines first started, in the late 1800s, people used to destroy machines because they're going to take our jobs. Well, then, did they take our jobs? Some, yeah, but then machines were very useful. We needed a lot of people to work on land, to plow land. So when tractors were invented, lots of people lost jobs. For the economy as a whole, we were like, that's actually good. We don't want people to do those things. We can people do other things. We seem to have a shortage of workers in general. That's why the unemployment rate is relatively low at 4% or 4.1%. If we deport a lot of people, we're going to need even more. Those might not be jobs, especially somebody who's trained for an office career, and they don't want to go up on a roof and replace shingles. So there's going to be a mismatch there. So I feel for your son. I'm not trying to.
He's not actually the worst case.
Of course, yeah, I would say.
It's just he has probably the most specific, since you were asking about the specific, and I can't go into more detail on that. But others are in university administration, which right now is under attack. I have two nieces that are, just
for the recording, if you could take the microphone.
Yeah, I've got another question.
Oh, just for him to finish for a sec.
Probably, yeah. I was just saying that, I have nieces that are at university administration who have DEI components to their job. I have a niece's husband who's an archaeologist who does the pre-development stuff that's probably all going, he's probably in the most danger. I have another one that's in the park service. I mean, it's just, it seems to be rampant in terms of, and my son who has been doing solar work is not doing solar work anymore. It's like, and he's a designer, so he's not, I'm not talking about someone who is out laboring, whatever. So these are highly skilled, highly trained jobs with graduate degrees that are threatened. And so I do have another comment, but I think first round.
You mentioned how handy it was to have a printing press that would print dollar bills and ship them across the country or across the ocean, and people would stick them around in their shoe boxes and not use them. So is that going to continue in the foreseeable future, or are people going to get tired of dollars?
Well, that purely depends on us. I mean, there have been attempts to replace the dollar with other currencies, like the euro would be another significant currency. the size of us, the size of our economy allows us to do things that doesn't allow other countries to do. Would you want to hold Brazilian debt? I don't know. Brazil has went through a few financial crises in history. Argentinian, even Chinese, or Russian debt. So there's not that many big players. Switzerland is a good player, but Switzerland is so small that there's just not enough. When the 2008 financial crisis happened, everybody wanted the Swiss francs, and Switzerland almost collapsed. They had to actually put a stop and put a lot more money into the economy because their exports all of a sudden were uncompetitive. So as a reserve currency, it's very hard to get that status. That's a hard-earned status. Could you easily lose it? It's not that easy because there are no other alternatives. And I like to say we are the tallest, I keep using this term, maybe I even use it here. We are the tallest pygmy. It doesn't mean that we are super, we're great, we're really tall, but, we are better than others in terms of people who would rather have the US dollar than other currencies. Now, we've seen lately people getting soured for US products, like Tesla especially, whiskey and all that. So could people start being soured against the US dollar? Sure, why not? Not going to happen immediately, but you can imagine some finance ministers or other countries are having discussions, how do we unwind our US position in the long run? Right? So we don't have to be 40% in it, let's do it down to 30. And let's take some other currencies as things. So doesn't mean that we're going to die, doesn't mean that the economy is going to collapse, but not as good as perhaps right now. So those things could happen very easily.
Okay. One sec. Let me interject something there, too. We have time for maybe one or two more questions. I see a hand up. I want to ask something, though. And going back to the essay that we read today on sort of the rise of industrial policy with the Biden administration and now the Trump, one of the arguments I've heard in favor of tariffs is that it will help renationalize or get businesses, industries to relocate back to the United States. What is your thought on the reality of that? Is that something that could work?
Businesses make plans a long time ahead. So I have a friend who works for Honda. Right now it's 2025. They're working on a 2030 model, which means that they're gearing up the tooling, they're gearing up supply, where they're going to get plastics, the design, everything for the 2030 model. They don't plan today or for tomorrow. So if you believe that the long-term strategy going 10, 15 years is going to be that, then businesses would say, okay, we can incorporate that and we can move some production here. That's very costly. There's a cost to any decision. So stay in, let's say, Canada or move to the US. If it doesn't cost to transfer, then you would say, of course, they're going to transfer. But if there's going to be a cost, then you balance. Is it really beneficial? If you know that tariff is going to be forever, then you can calculate, okay, does it make sense? Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it still makes sense to pay the tariff. That might be the cheaper option. So I can't really tell you whether that's going to be the case. If you want them to relocate, typically, if you want people to do something, an honest economist will tell you, pay them to do what you want them to do.
Sort of like incentives to promote green industry
Yes.
versus
So what do you do?
penalizing
Pay
green
them to do
outside
it. So
the US, right?
industrial policy in that way makes more sense. If you believe that that's what way you want to do. So would you want to transfer some industries here? Okay. Clearly not for jobs because they don't generate jobs. Intel is not going to generate jobs. You're saying, okay, it is for our national security. Okay, I can buy that as an argument. Although I do have my questions about who determines what is national security? How do you say a stop? So not, okay, this is national security. So from here on, it is, from here, that. What determines what is national security? You remember COVID? Ventilators. We need ventilators. This is our national security. We need to ramp up production. Even Musk was saying we're going to develop ventilators. How long did that last? Like 2 weeks, and then they were like, yeah, these are not that useful. Let's do something else. So then they were saying, well, we didn't produce enough those suits, medical suits, for a pandemic. We need to produce those. Okay, well, what is going to be the next scare? Do we know? Maybe it's going to be some virus where your left foot falls off. So then we need a lot of prosthetics for left feet. Not right, left feet. Right? So what do we know? What's going to be the next one? I don't know. I don't have an idea. So being prepared for every single contingency is very expensive. So what do? Lots of times you say, well, other countries produce different things, and we realize that there might be some kind of a friction, a glitch if a crisis happens. COVID was a crisis where everybody needed the same thing at the same time. Just like eggs right now, right? No matter how much we want it, we have a problem. Is it going to solve itself out? Yes, but right now there's a shortage. Could we have stockpiled millions and millions and millions of eggs, actually billions, because we use millions on a daily basis? Yes, we could have done that. That would have averted high prices of eggs right now. But guess what? It's costly to do that for eggs. Eggs don't last super, super long, that you can save them for years and so on. So what do you plan for? Right? Lots of times we can't really plan for every single contingency.
Okay, thank you. All right, one more. David has his hand up here again. All right.
Every farmer wants a better tractor. Technology, we've always thought, it's great if it takes away our work. We only get mad when it takes away our jobs. Mm-hmm. And I guess my question is, how do we decouple that, and especially in a situation where we tend to be trying to cram more work on more people, and in my opinion, and I don't know if this is correct, I'm not an economist, a lot of that is due to the fact that we have coupled healthcare to employment, and that cost of healthcare is reduced if you have fewer people employed. Hence, taking away work also takes away jobs when that doesn't necessarily follow. Could you speak to that?
I mean, look, we've had a dynamic economy where people lose jobs every day. We transform. But what is the rate of unemployment? It's 4%. So people find new jobs. Is it problematic when healthcare is tied to jobs? I would say yes. We are the only industrialized nation that does it that way. Others have national healthcare. And it seems to work for them just fine. Now, this also seems to work for most people just fine, too. This is people find different ways how to navigate the system. It's not that we don't have medical service. I would say it would probably be better if it was national, but some people would lose out in the process. Some people would win. So that's why it's hard to politically pass any kind of a change. In terms of jobs, think about it this way. Yes, you're right. When we do some things, some jobs are lost. I mean, think about a bank. Before, you had to go and wait in line and talk to a teller. Now, you sit in your car, just pull up and put a card in, actually on this side, put a card in, and the ATM does it for you, right? That ATM took several jobs because it's open 24/7, right? You had 3 tellers working in 3 shifts if you wanted to cover 24 hours. So 3 jobs were lost. Now, you as a consumer, you were like, that's fantastic. I can do this at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm seeing I need one more beer. I just need to get one. I just need to get, get $20 out. Right? So it's a different perspective on the users versus whose jobs are lost. So Bush steel tariffs in 2002. That was the first big policy that was disruptive to this globalism. They saved, well, we don't know how many. So there were total about 187,000 workers in the steel and aluminum industry, right? So that industry was, some jobs were going to go because they were going to shut down these steel mills, especially in Pennsylvania. So 187 workers working total in this industry. So they put the tariff on, they were saved. Guess what? Prices for downstream manufacturing increased. Anything from car manufacturers to people who make locomotives to people who make skyscrapers, anybody that uses steel. Manufacturers of beer through the aluminum cans and so on. Now, there are many more uses of this. So calculations were that roughly about 200,000 jobs downstream were lost as a result in an attempt to save 187,000 jobs. Some of them, they were saved. But then you had a cost. Remember balloon? popped up somewhere else. So there's a cost. You might say, I want to save these workers, and that's a political question. That's not an economic question. If you decide to save somebody who voted for you, I mean, that was the idea in Pennsylvania, but then there are some costs. You can't say that there are no associated costs. And Ohio lost some jobs. Biggest losses were California and Texas at that time. Michigan lost some jobs. Illinois lost some jobs in manufacturing because users are greater than the producers. There's many more users. So typically what we know is when policies like that, trade policies, is that benefits are very concentrated to a very specific group. Costs are very diffused. So benefit steelmakers, you're going to pay more on a car. How much? Some estimates maybe $500 a car, $400 a car, $300 a car. So they'd say, well, okay, that's I can afford this to save some of the jobs. Well, when you combine everybody that buys cars compared to how much was lost, typically there's a bigger loss than gain. Trump did still tariffs in 2018, and some of the estimates from the Peterson Institute were about $650,000 per job saved. So that was the cost. Could you save a job? You can. Does it cost? Yes. How much? About $650,000. It would have been better to just pay them to do nothing. That would have been cheaper. Just how are you going to sell that politically? This way we save jobs. The cost, we don't know yet. It's going to be okay. This way I'm paying somebody to do nothing, to be furloughed or so. Politically, it's very hard to pass that. Although, remember, economists would tell you, if you want people to do something, pay them to do it. So you want people to do nothing, pay them to do it instead of helping them and then hurting the rest of the economy.
All right, well, thank you. Here it is. Thank you, everyone. Goran, wonderful talk. Thanks so much. All right, I want to thank you all for coming out today. A couple quick reminders. The National Opinion Poll through the Great Decisions Foreign Policy Association. You can do this online, or if you would like a paper packet that you can bring back every week and fill it out, we still have 5 or 6 copies of the paper packet, and then you can send it in to the Foreign Policy Association. They put those into a final report across the whole country. They give it to Congress, they give it to the White House, etc., to let them know what we're saying out here in the wilds. So next week, I hope you will all return. We have another great talk, American Policy in the Middle East, taking stock and looking ahead with Dr. Ori Yehudai from Ohio State University's Department of History. He's a leading expert on the issues of Israel and the Middle East and political and historical relations there. So I hope you can join us. If anyone wants to join us for lunch, as always, we are over at Amato's in the back room. Just walk all the way back. You're welcome to join us. It is at your own cost, just to be clear. But we'd love to have you join us with the speaker. So thanks again, and thank you, Goran.